Welcome to TheKillFile, your favorite true crime podcast. I'm your host, Brittany Spears. Each week, we will explore the dark corners of true crime, unsolved mysteries, and murder. Join me as we uncover secrets, investigate evidence, and dive into the chilling details of some of the most fascinating cases. Get ready for a journey into the dark unknown because, in TheKillFile, nothing stays buried forever. Hi there, and welcome to episode 62 of TheKillFile. I'm so glad that you guys are back for another case. Before we jump into today's story, just a few quick reminders. First, check out the website at thekillfile.com to find our awesome and newest true crime merch there. There's some fun shirts that were just put out that I absolutely love. Check those out if you want to. Second, the Hidden Files link is up on the website, but the new bonus content is not quite ready yet, so the link will take you to the Patreon page, but it won't be up and running for a little bit until I can get a few bonus episodes ready so that I'm ahead. Look, doing one episode a week is a lot when you do every little thing by yourself. Most podcasters have a partner or a team already because they're already established, or maybe they're a little famous, but building one from the ground up is hard when you have a family to raise, and doing the bonus content takes a little time, so bear with me. One section that I'm trying to get up and running is called Listener Files, where you guys can write in stories about yourself or others, and maybe some of your own experiences. You can write in about anything from your own hometown murder that stuck out to you, or maybe you want to write about your cousin's wife who was a showgirl in Vegas and knows some murders. Maybe your friend saw an art heist taking place and told you about it. Maybe you caught someone breaking into your home and you lived to tell the tale. If you'd like to share your story or somebody else's, you can either write into the podcast at thekillfilepodcast@gmail.com, or now we have a submission form on the website specifically for listener tales. There's also a submission form now on the main page for a case that you want me to cover. Lastly, please take a second to review the podcast, rate us, or follow and subscribe wherever you listen for the newest episodes that come out each Monday. It's a free podcast, so I need help from my listeners for the support and to reach more people. Okay, that's it for business. Let's talk about today's case. Today's an interesting one, as it's got a controversial twist at the end that will leave you wondering what this sick bastard was thinking. Today, we are going to be covering Michael Ross, aka the Roadside Strangler. Trigger warnings for today are going to be rape of a minor, murder of a minor, and sexual assault on both adults and minors. Here we go. Criminologist and author Christopher Barry D. sat across the table from a known serial killer with an IQ of 155. This Roadside Strangler, as he was known. The problem with Michael Bruce Ross, among other things, is that he had a non-assuming look. In fact, some would describe him as looking like the boy next door. According to an episode of True Crime Central where Chris was interviewed, he would tell the tale of what it was like sitting across from someone like Ross and how you must act. Chris would explain that when people wonder if he was scared when he interviews serial killers or true psychopaths, he always says no, because they can't touch him, and he holds the power and he does not let go of it. He further explains when dealing with someone like Ross, showing any emotions at all is considered a weakness to the psychopath across from him, and any sign of weakness could make him prey. He stays stoic in his appearance and temperament, as these monsters tell him the worst of what they do. I wonder if people that he interviews almost get to a point where they're trying to tell him horrors of what they've done to other people just to see if they could get a rise out of him at all. This is almost what seems to happen with Ross. While Chris is sitting with Ross, his intentions were to talk to Ross about two murders that only the authorities at the time knew about. Chris would say that he did little things to help Ross out, like get him a soda, the kind that he liked, and making sure that he wasn't handcuffed as they chatted across the table from one another. This was going to be their second visit. Chris would say that he and Ross had formed some sort of relationship, for lack of a better term, and he would further state that these people can lie and cheat, but it is Chris who is manipulating the killer, not the other way around. The quote-unquote compassion that is shown with the little things seems to make a big difference. Chris would explain during one particular session that Ross was boasting to the criminologist about how long it would take him to strangle one of his victims, and further told him all about the bruises that some of the victims would have around their necks. Apparently, while Ross was attacking a victim, he would derive his sexual pleasure from the act of killing itself, not the rape or sexual assault. He would explain to Chris that sometimes he would release the pressure from their necks, from their strangulation, because he had not yet reached an orgasm, and he needed to build up his sexual pressure again. At some point during the interview, Chris would say to Ross, and keep in mind, Chris is from the UK, so try to picture that kind of an accent as I say this. He said, quote, "Michael, you're not a big hitter. 6 or 7, what's that? You're not a Ted Bundy. You're not a Kenneth Bianchi. You're a small fry. Little guy." End quote. Of course, in his accent, he said little guy, which I just loved. But I also like what he's doing with Ross. I like that he's almost bashing his victim count in order to get him to confess to more murders. It's smart and bold. Apparently, after this comment, Ross would look at Chris with a stunned expression on his face. When Chris pressed further, telling Ross that he only had 5 victims, really, Ross pressed back and said he actually killed 7 people. Chris was like, "No, you didn't," and kind of pressing back in disbelief. This whole interview, he was doing this when it came to the victims. Then Ross said he actually had been the one who killed Jiang Naktu and Paula Pereira. Chris, of course, said, "No, you didn't." "Fine, then just tell me about Jiang's murder then." Almost like, prove it. Ross would tell Chris he threw her over the dam into the river, that he didn't actually kill her, she just drowned. When Chris asked about Paula's murder and asked him what he did with her body, Ross would say that he dumped her body by a willow tree that was on the side of the road. Chris then asked Ross what she was wearing, to which Ross replied a school uniform. When pushed further as to what exactly he did to the body afterwards, Ross would say, without feeling, that he treated her like trash, and told Chris in an almost proud way that he used her, abused her, and then just walked away. This is Michael Bruce Ross, serial killer, the Roadside Strangler. Let's learn a little bit about how we got here. Michael Bruce Ross was born on July 26, 1959, to parents Pat and Daniel Ross in a place called Putnam, Connecticut, where he grew up, according to True Crime New England, on a chicken farm, and he had 3 younger siblings. During my research, I came across an interview of an author on a podcast called Criminal. It's wonderful. During the interview, Martha Elliott wrote a book about Ross called The Man and the Monster, an intimate portrait of a serial killer. Martha explained that while Ross was growing up on the chicken farm, around the age of 8, he was in charge of taking care of the chicks that were hatched and delivered as early as just a day old. Ross was expected to get up early, to give them water and food, and to care for them until they would show any signs of being sick or that they were not going to grow up normally and be a good egg layer. Then, according to Martha, it was Ross's job to take those chicks and, quote, wring its neck and kill it. Martha would further say that Ross didn't particularly like this part of his job, but that he did it because it was his duty, and he would end up being a hardworking person. According to the Big Book of Serial Killers, Volume 2, Ross's home life was very dysfunctional, as his mother would regularly beat the children, but it was mostly geared towards Ross, the eldest. Ross's mother would have some sort of mental illness that I couldn't find the diagnosis of, but she was admitted to a psychiatric hospital twice for whatever was going on with her. One of those occasions is said that since Pat had always hated the farm life, she took off with another man to North Carolina, and this was after she and Daniel had 4 kids, and she allegedly had 2 abortions. Upon her return, when she was admitted to Norwich Hospital, the doctor who had admitted Pat said that she had talked of suicide and hitting her kids. A few sources would also speak to the fact that it was seemingly widely known that one of Ross's uncles had been molesting him before ultimately committing suicide when Ross was just 6 years old. One source said his uncle at the time was 14, although I couldn't confirm that. If that's true, that's just horrible for everyone and trauma everywhere. Another source would speak to how Ross had, in turn, molested 2 girls during his preteen years. However, he would deny any wrongdoing, and he would say that they had simply just been playing like doctor. Again, for this, his parents would beat him as a form of punishment. Ross would later say that he doesn't exactly remember much of the abuse from his childhood, but has fond memories of helping his dad around the farm. First off, beating a child because of sexual curiosity, whether it's appropriate or not, is never the answer, and is going to do some serious damage. And now you could be linking sexuality with punishment and could be enforcing a feeling of guilt or wrongness in sexual attraction. I cannot imagine what that does to someone's psyche. But secondly, there is a very normal sexual curiosity and or normal range of sexual behavior that children may engage in, and it's not necessarily abuse or molestation depending on how old those girls were and if they were forced or coerced. If the, albeit a little older, children were playing doctor in a consensual fashion, as uncomfortable as it is for everyone involved, it can be normal sexual curiosity. I personally feel that another course of action would have benefited everyone instead of physical harm, but hey, what do I know? I will say, though, that I went down a rabbit hole of science articles on what is normal and what's not normal when it comes to sexual curiosity and things that happen within families or friends in childhood. One thing that I read, though, was that children that are sexually abused, and I believe this means from like an adult, not like another child, because that's not really abuse, depending on the factors, but anyways, that children that are abused are more likely to display or involve themselves in more sexual behaviors, which is interesting. If Ross was abused or molested by an older uncle, then it could be a part of what stemmed his more sexual curiosity with the two girls. Also, let's not forget that teens and preteens are flooded with hormones, and their frontal lobes aren't even close to being fully developed, so making great decisions probably isn't on their highest priority list. This is my own opinion, but I think that there are quite a few generations of people who have engaged in sexual play like Doctor and other things as children, maybe because sex was so hushed and never got talked about, especially those experiences that may or may not have hurt them. I think kids nowadays are paid much more attention to, and maybe this is just wishful thinking, but I don't know if it happens quite as much as it used to, but I don't personally think that it should be looked at with such shame that it used to be or that it still can be. Talking to somebody about those experiences may be a way to get some weight of that shame off your chest that you don't deserve to have in the first place. Well, at least most of us. We all did stuff as children that we look back as adults and cringe. These experiences are no different. You were a child. It's okay. Moving on. As previously stated, Ross was a smart guy. He would end up attending Cornell University starting in 1977, where he would study agricultural economics. Ross would be described as an intelligent man with a great work ethic, but he was a little awkward. He would struggle with relationships with women, though, as it was said that he lacked empathy and also hadn't developed many social abilities. When Ross had started a relationship with a woman that had been in the ROTC, it was said that he had already thought to himself that this could be a woman that he married. It was said that somewhere along the way, this unnamed woman would become pregnant and then subsequently had an abortion, and after this, the relationship would start to have some issues. Eventually, the woman would sign up for military duty and would do a contract for 4 years, and this is when the couple would break up. Ross would later admit that when his and the woman's relationship started to have troubles is when Ross had started to have sexually violent fantasies, and then by his sophomore year in college, he would start to stalk women. Apparently, by the time that Ross was a senior at Cornell, he was engaged to a woman. However, despite this, he actually felt that he was being taken over by his violent fantasies, and this is when he would commit his first rape. Within the first year of committing his first rape, he would also commit his first rape and murder by strangulating his victim. Ross allegedly felt hatred for himself after committing his first rape and had tried to commit suicide but was unable to bring himself to do it. He then promised himself that he wasn't going to hurt anyone ever again, but of course that didn't last. Ross would actually attack a 16-year-old girl who he dragged into the woods and who was so lucky to have made it out alive. When this attack happened, the authorities had no idea that Ross had already committed his first murder and would go on to murder more women. For the attack on this 16-year-old, he would receive a mere 2 years probation and a fine. What in the actual fuck? It would later come out that seemingly any time a woman would either dump Ross or even make him mad, this is when he would attack women, raping and or killing them. I guess his fragile fucking ego couldn't handle a woman who didn't take his bullshit or who broke up with him. What a loser. On May 12, 1981, Ross committed his first murder of a 25-year-old fellow Cornell student named Deong Nak Tu. Deong was one of the last victims that would actually be linked to Ross, although she was allegedly his first murder. Ross and Deong both attended the same evening class in college, and when Deong's body was found at the bottom of Fall Creek Gorge, this was actually near Ross's fraternity, but police first ruled it a suicide. However, there were some inconsistencies with the ruling according to the autopsy, and her family and friends, they knew that there was no way she had taken her own life. Deong's father would say that she had worked very hard and would remember her as an idealist. She was said to have sponsored children who were orphaned through the mail, joined a Big Brother and Sister program, and also volunteered her time to help patients with cancer. She seemed to be someone who was determined to do good in the world. Deong had immigrated to America from Vietnam in 1969 with her family, moving to Bethesda, Maryland, and seemed to be on a good path in life. She graduated high school with honors and had already graduated from Vassar in 1977. She was currently working on her first year as a graduate student at Cornell. It wasn't completely uncommon for people to jump to their deaths into the gorges, and coupled with the fact that the authorities couldn't find any signs of foul play, this is probably why it was first ruled a suicide. Ross was never charged with the murder of Young, even though he admitted to it, and I couldn't find the details of what exactly happened to this victim anywhere, just that he had admitted to throwing her over the bridge. On January 5th of 1982, Ross would abduct a young woman named Tammy Williams, who was 17 years old. Tammy was walking home from her boyfriend's house when Ross would come upon her. A friend of Tammy's named Justine would say that Tammy was a normal teenage girl with a good heart, and she was fun to be around. During this time of her abduction, Tammy had been working at the department store named King's. Both Justine and Tammy had actually gone to school with Ross while they were growing up, all of them in Brooklyn, and both girls had walked by, seemingly like a shortcut right by his chicken farm that Ross grew up on, so they kind of knew his family. Tammy would be seen as missing for more than 2 years before her body was actually found. When Tammy's body was found, there was evidence of rape, and it was determined her cause of death was strangulation. Sadly, Tammy was also her parents' only child. I cannot fucking imagine, and all because this sick, sadistic prick could. Ross's next victim was killed on March 1st, 1982, and this was a 16-year-old girl named Paula Pereira, who was said to have gone missing after hitchhiking to a vocational cooking class. Hitchhiking was something that Paula often did, and of course we know how dangerous this is now, but it wasn't uncommon back then. Ross picked her up as he was driving back to Connecticut from Cornell. Ross would then rape Paula and dump her body on what was said to be a marshy area close to I-84 on the side of the road. 18 days later, Paula's body would be found. Paula was known to have told her friends that she would never accept a ride from anyone that she thought of as creepy, which was part of the problem with Ross. He didn't look or seem scary. Ross would rape and strangle Paula. One of Paula's friends, named Barbara, had been a friend of Paula since childhood and says that Paula was an innocent person, a person of whimsy, and had a great personality. Another friend of Paula's, named Emery, would say that Paula wanted to be a chef and that she had blue eyes and blonde curly hair with cute dimples. Martha Elliott, the aforementioned author, while being interviewed, would say that Ross had mentioned that he liked knowing the women were scared and that he would just come up behind them quick and using a ligature around their neck, he liked to gain control of his victims. Sometimes it was easier for him as he would pick the women up, drive them somewhere, rape them, and kill them. Martha would further say that she had really gotten to know Ross, and of course this was all after Ross had been caught. She would spend a lot of time on the phone with him, learning about him. She would say Ross suffered from what she thought was a sexually sadistic disorder to the extreme. Deborah Smith Taylor was a 23-year-old woman who was abducted on June 15, 1982, after Deborah and her husband had been arguing and their vehicle ended up running out of gas. Instead of walking together to find a nearby gas station, they each went in different locations looking for help or a place for gas. Deborah would be missing for 4 months when a jogger would come across what was said to be her skeletal remains. Ross had abducted, raped, and killed Deborah that evening. The next victim, a 19-year-old woman named Robin Stavinsky, was killed on October 23, 1983. Robin was on her track and field team while she had been in high school and was said to be quite athletic and strong. In fact, it was unthinkable to friends and family of Robin that someone would have been strong enough to overpower her in order to commit rape and then murder. One source would say that Robin was hitchhiking when Ross would pick her up, abducting her, and then proceeded to drag her on the grounds of a state hospital in Norwich into a wooded area. After Ross had raped and killed Robin, he covered her body with leaves, and about a week later, joggers would find Robin's body. It was after the murder of Robin that authorities would realize this rape and murder matched those of Tammy and Deborah's, and that they had a serial killer on their hands targeting young women and girls. It was horrifically on Thanksgiving Day that Robin's mother had to go identify the remains of her daughter. According to the True Crime Central video, Ross would tell some of the women that he was going to rape them. He would then have them lay down on their faces and would tell them, like, hey, I'm just going to tie you up and then I'm going to leave. But sadly, once they were tied up, he would strangle them from behind, which I can tell you from my own experience that being strangled from behind is absolutely horrific. I can't imagine the feeling of someone using a ligature from behind when you can't see And to top it off, you're tied up and unable to move your hands or body. Fuck, these poor women don't deserve what this piece of shit is doing to them. This fucking coward can't even look his victims in the face as he's strangling them. He has to turn them over first. Ugh, I hate this piece of shit. And again, also some sick fuck can get his jollies from killing them. Ross was said to have raped 7 out of his 8 victims either before, during, or after he murdered them. Ross's youngest victim were a set of best friends who were sickeningly only 14 years old. Now later on, experts would say that Ross seemed to have no empathy or feelings towards any of his victims except for these 2 14-year-old girls. It was said that these 2 would both bother his conscience later on, and we will talk about that a little bit later. So on Easter Sunday, April 22nd, 1984, the 2 best friends named April Brunet and Leslie Shelley had been at the movies, and then they hitchhiked a ride home. Instead, Ross would take the 2 girls to a place called Beach Pond in Rhode Island. When he went past the place that he was supposed to be taking them, April pulled out a knife that she had on her, and she ordered him to stop the car. Good for her. Unfortunately, he was able to take the knife from her and continue his plans. Ross would first force Leslie into the trunk so that he could attack one girl at a time. This next sentence is heartbreaking, but it speaks to the character of Leslie, so I have to say it. It was said that during Ross's attack on April, while Leslie was locked in the trunk, Leslie was shouting, quote-unquote, words of comfort to her best friend. Ugh, it's absolutely heartbreaking and sickening to think of what these 2 girls had to go through at the hands of this disgusting pig. After Ross had raped April, he would then proceed to strangle her before he went back to the car for Leslie. During Ross's later confessions, he would say that he thought that Leslie was very brave, so he claimed to have chosen not to rape her, but still strangled her to death so she couldn't later identify him. She was brave. They both were. And they both tried their best. They were 14, for fuck's sake. So Ross's final victim would be a 17-year-old girl named Wendy Berrybolt. She went missing on June 13th, 1984, after having been seen walking on State Highway 12 headed to a corner store. Wendy had left a note to her parents letting them know that she was going to be walking to the store, but sadly she never returned. Her body would later be found underneath a pile of rocks on the side of the road in Griswold, Connecticut. It was said in sources that Michael had followed Wendy in his car for a while, then he got out and he was talking to her. He then was said to have pulled Wendy over a stone wall into a wooded area that would eventually open up to a field. He then raped her, forced her to turn over, and then strangled the poor girl from behind. This time, though, there would be witness accounts saying that they had seen a man in a blue Toyota car parked not far from where Wendy was actually found. Michael Ross's home turned out to be not very far from where Wendy was found as well, and because he drove a blue Toyota, he would be one of the very first suspects that police would visit for this case. The chief investigator on Ross's case was a man named Michael Malchik, and another detective, Jane Harris, was also reportedly on the case as well. When Ross was approached about the cases, this is when Ross would mention his 2 prior sexual offenses, and Malchik decided to go ahead and bring him in for questioning. Ross was said to have gone quietly. At the time, Ross was living in Jewett City and was working as an insurance salesman. Again, he's just a very unassuming man. It was said that during his initial interview that Ross seemingly started dropping hints that he was their man, all the while still believing that he was the smartest man in the room, as they all do. Eventually, within just hours, Ross would confess to some of the murders that he had committed. According to an article in the Yale Daily News, 2 of the murders that Ross had committed, he'd pled guilty to in exchange of a sentence of life without parole. A few years later, he would again confess to 2 more murders while he had been at Cornell, and again would receive a life sentence without parole. But there were 4 murders that he had admitted to in a particular jurisdiction in Connecticut, and the state attorney, a man named Robert Sadie, well, he wanted the death penalty for Ross. And he was not alone. Many felt the same way. In fact, investigator Malchik would say that Ross was quote-unquote the poster boy for the death penalty. Chris, the criminologist and author, would later say that getting a confession to Jung and Paula, he not only received awards from the city, but he also received thank you letters from the parents of the 2 victims for being able to bring a tiny reprieve of knowing what happened to their daughters at least, and this was thanks to Chris Berry. During this particular trial, the defense seemed up against it, trying to keep Ross from getting the death penalty. They were said to have used things like the fact that Ross suffered from sexual sadism, which would have, quote, impaired his ability to control his actions, end quote. That's not a fucking excuse. You go get help if you can't control yourself. Get over your self-image and go get some fucking professional help. Prosecutors poked lots of holes in the defense's argument, and rightfully so. They argued that even a sexual sadist shouldn't escape his moral and legal responsibility from picking up girls and women and killing them. The jury in this case would sentence Ross to death. In 1994, the Connecticut Supreme Court, however, would find that there had been some evidence that had been left out of his trial by the judge, and this was evidence that pertained to Ross's mental state. According to an article written in the Hartford Courant about this case, in June of 1995, Ross would actually dismiss his public defenders that were court-appointed so that he could continue, but he wanted to represent himself instead. He said that he deserves the death penalty and doesn't want to put the families of his victims through another sentencing hearing. This is the controversial part I was talking about, where people are wondering, what is this bastard thinking? He went from horrific rapist and serial killer to, I deserve this? It was said that during his time in prison that Ross had found God, and that factored into him all of a sudden having a conscience about the families he had hurt. He was also doing some writings about himself, almost trying to seem like this hero-type person by choosing death instead of fighting his death sentence like he could have. Maybe he just didn't want to sit and rot for the rest of his pathetic life. Gross. If he really felt that bad for the families, he wouldn't try to involve himself in the narrative. And the worst part is, sources said some of his writings were mailed to a list of people who almost subscribed to them. I hate it. Fucking narcissist. In March of 1998, and after years of negotiation, Ross would reach an agreement with C. Robert Sadie, who at the time was the special state's attorney, and something that was never seen before. Ross agreed to be executed. In July of the same year, a judge would deny the deal that was struck because it would not allow for a lawful penalty hearing that was needed. After this, Ross would reverse his agreement and said that now he was going to fight any effort of sentencing him to death row. November of the same year, Ross attempted suicide while in prison by swallowing what the article called some kind of toxic substance. The new sentencing hearing would commence in February of 2000, with Ross's defense saying that Ross was indeed mentally ill and could not control his own sexual obsessions that were often violent. They went as far as to say that when Ross was not medicated, it was similar to someone having a song stuck in their head that they just can't get out. Martha Elliott, the author and journalist, would come into the picture now as she had learned about this case. However, Martha was completely against the death penalty. Martha talked about how she was the editor and publisher of the Connecticut Law Tribune at the time during her interview on Criminal. After having weekly phone calls, eventually Martha attended one of the courtroom hearings, and after the first piece where she covered his story was over, Ross continued to call Martha weekly. She would further say that she felt like it was some sort of a community service that she was doing, listening to Ross's problems and issues, and she said that she felt like it was the least that she could do for this lonely man who was probably going to be executed on death row. This was not without consequences, though, as it did affect her family. There was one evening where she was on the phone with Ross and her son needed a favor, but she was preoccupied on the phone and couldn't. She would say on Criminal that her son called her a terrible mom for liking a serial killer better than her own son. And that seemed to really hit her about what she was doing in that moment. In 2005, the courts would find that Ross was healthy and competent enough from medical perspectives to be executed. Martha would fly to California to spend some time with Ross before his execution. Apparently, Ross told Martha to tell her children to read the book that he had sent them and to think of him. Because now that him and Martha had this 10-year-long quote-unquote friendship, he knew they were getting older. Martha would then explain what Ross's execution was like from her perspective, as she would say that it was after 1 a.m. when the families of the victims and the loved ones were brought in to the area where they could watch the execution. I guess there was a few sections of the room depending on who you were and why you were there, like media or victims' families, or if you were there on Ross's behalf. Martha would say that Ross didn't open his eyes when they pulled back the curtain to reveal the crowd that was there to watch, and he refused a last statement. Martha would speculate she thought it was because he didn't want to break down and cry, and maybe that would be insulting to some. I wondered if it's because he just wanted to go out, in his mind, as if he was doing these families some type of favor. Hey, you want to do these innocent people a favor? You don't rape and kill their fucking daughters or sisters or mothers or whatever, you piece of shit. Michael Bruce Ross was executed by lethal injection on May 13th, 2005, and was pronounced dead around 2:30 a.m. Ross was 45 years old. Apparently, outside of the prison as Ross was being executed, there were some protesters and people gathering who had sung and thought that the state executing someone was quote-unquote barbaric. Loved ones of the victims who were witness to the execution had different feelings about it. Some felt that he died too peacefully. Some felt bad for Ross's family. According to an article in the New York Times, the sister of Robin Stavinsky, a woman named Debbie, would say, quote, "I thought I would feel closure, but I felt anger just watching him lay there and sleep after what he did to these women." End quote. I'm with you, girl. And that, my friends, is the story of the Roadside Strangler, serial killer Michael Bruce Ross, rapist, pedophile, and twisted killer. Okay, first off, I hope that the loved ones of the victims of the sick fuck went on to lead happy lives as much as they're able to after this, because they deserve love and support and happiness. Secondly, how do you guys feel about the death penalty? I personally, and this is just my opinion, I'm all for it for people like this, but I do completely understand why people are against it. Some people are against it because they feel like they don't suffer enough just getting to die, and some because they think it's wrong, and it's not really about that person, but the simple fact that we as a society shouldn't be killing people. Now, let's put our thoughts on that aside for a moment. This is what I want to know. If a person was being executed, and it was somebody who had killed like your mother, your father, your sister or brother, or your children, and it was on purpose, not an accident, would you go watch it? I wonder this all the time with cases like this, and I get so angry for these victims and their families. And on one side, I'm like, hell yeah, I would go watch that fucker take his last breath, especially if I was a loved one of a victim. And on the other hand, there are times when I'm like, if I'm taken out of a case, I think it's kind of weird as a society that we offer people to watch other people die, right? Like, putting aside the reason for it, we're kind of a weird species, huh? Call it justice, call it revenge, call it barbaric, whatever you want. But I think if someone killed a person that I love, especially in a brutal manner, or raped them on top of it, oh yeah, I would want to watch that fucker suffer. He would deserve it, in my opinion. I've even heard people say that they feel like people who do shit like that deserve to get those exact things done right back to them. And I fucking get that too. What I wonder is how it would feel to watch a person expire. Would you have like a ping of feeling bad for them? Even if it was just for a moment? Would you feel satisfied? And what's that like? Interesting stuff, in my opinion. Let me know your thoughts on any of the KillFile social media platforms, or even just comment if you can, wherever you listen. I'm honestly curious of your thoughts and how you feel on this subject. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed learning about this controversial case of this asshole as much as I did. And I hope to see you guys next week here on The KillFile, where nothing stays buried forever. Stay safe, you guys. Bye. All right, guys, that's going to do it for today. A few quick reminders before you go. Please don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review on your platform. It will help the podcast grow and other true crime lovers to find us. Also, check out the website, TheKillFile.com, where you can suggest a case, find our merch shop, and submit a listener file. Follow The KillFile on your favorite social media platforms. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Blue Sky, and TikTok. Of course, you can always subscribe on YouTube as well. Find all of the links for the socials on the website. Come back on Mondays wherever you get your podcast fix, when we will cover another case on The KillFile, where nothing stays buried forever. Stay safe, you guys. Bye.